Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is Grant Seeking in Times of Uncertainty. My name is David Gates and I'm GrantStation's Director of Online Education. Here at GrantStation, we are committed to equipping nonprofits with the tools, knowledge, and resources needed to secure funding and sustain their missions. Our curated databases are maintained by a dedicated research team and provide access to high-quality funding opportunities. Now more than ever, in the face of government uncertainty, having professional grade tools at an affordable cost can make all the difference. To support your work, we're in the midst of our spring sale where you can get a 1-year GrantStation membership for $199 or a 2-year membership for $299. And I'll drop a link in the chat for that sale here shortly. Now, your presenter today is Alice Ruhnke. Alice is the President of Education and Outreach at GrantStation. And today she's going to share tips and tools about adapting and thriving in these chaotic times. So please welcome Alice Ruhnke.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, David, and thank you all for being here. I know that it has been quite a wild ride. We did one of these about a little over a month ago with the federal changes going on and wanted to kind of come back and share kind of a little bit of the updates. I'm not going to spend quite as much time on the updates of what's going on because I know all of us are pretty exhausted by it. And that there's also lots of different things you can be tracking, right? We can be tracking the freeze and the impact on our nonprofits, or the federal aid and what that's doing to nonprofits, or the firing of employees and what that's doing to the workforce. And so there's a lot of things. And I know that I, for one, feel like I'm going to age myself here, but like Captain Kangaroo, trying to handle all those ping pong balls that are being dumped on your head and jumping all over the place, because it's really, really challenging. So what I have been focused more on is keeping up with the funding freeze itself. And some of the foreign aid freezes. And so that's what I'm going to kind of update us on today. And if you want, you can go to this link here, which David will put in the chat as well. But I'm trying to update that a minimum of once a week. And then if something else comes up, really important during the week, then I will update that as well. So we are keeping that written updates about the freeze with links to source materials so that you can go right to the documents that are being referenced, and not getting any sort of influence into the information, but really looking at those source documents. So we'll spend a little bit of time just kind of figuring out where we're at and what's going on. But then what are some of those things that we can do? Again, it's a very challenging time. There are ways to kind of pivot what we do and take some of the things that maybe we haven't relied on as much and pivot to new funders, pivot our strategies in how we're presenting our work, how we can diversify those funding streams, and how we can just overall communicate this with our stakeholders and those that will support us and help carry us on in these really challenging times. And then finally, I do just want to circle back to the kind of taking care of yourself component of this, because again, like I said last time, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And we have to do things to take care of our own mental and physical health during this time, as it is very, very stressful for a lot of us and our communities and those that we serve. And then, like I said, we'll do some question and answers at the end. So just a really brief overview was that we started this process with a bunch of different executive orders signed by the president. And this was back in January, right on Inauguration Day and going after Inauguration Day. There's more than these particular executive orders, and you can click on this link up here and just get to all of them. But these are the ones that really had a significant impact on us in the nonprofit community, in the whole sector, from environment to energy to DEI programs, to working with women and gender ideology and things like that. And so this is where we kind of started this journey of confusion and what can we do and what can't we do and that sort of thing. So the executive orders were signed, and then the first thing that came out was that memo, OMB M2513, that put the pause on all the federal funding. And so this was where we started with kind of some of the chaos, not knowing what was going on. And that the federal agencies were directed to pause all of their grant awards, those that were given, those that were in the process of being awarded, um, and those that were waiting for a request for proposals or notice of funding availabilities to go out, right? And everything was all of a sudden paused and made and asked to align with those executive orders from the president. Um, so that caused a lot of chaos. I know we all remember that. And then the next day, the Office of Management and Budget then said, okay, we are rescinding that memo. And so this should be, when we rescind the memo, this point should be moot to the courts and things. And then what came up was that the White House press secretary then said, okay, it's just rescinding the memo, not the actual freeze going on. So there has been a lot of different litigation around this, and there's two cases that are the predominant ones around this particular area from two U.S. district courts, one being in D.C. and the other one being in Rhode Island. And so, with all of these three things here, which is kind of me just taking a lot of things that have gone on in detail, that again, you can check out the article and link to each of these. But what the courts are saying is that, listen, we have to stop this freeze because there's no way to go back and undo the freeze. This is going to cause damage if the freeze continues. So it starts with that emergency stay. Then the courts then moved to a temporary restraining order, which is usually about 10 days until a preliminary injunction can be made. And the preliminary injunctions are where we're at with both of these courts in. And so just kind of, letting us know the preliminary injunction lasts until the court makes another order. Um, and um, and then the courts can kind of start to people can make their cases and start the trials and things like that. And that at the time that these trials are going on and being adjudicated, that we are supposed to not be having the freeze, right? They're supposed to pause on the funding freeze. And the National Council on Foundations is one of the plaintiffs in this case. And so what is important about a preliminary injunction? And so, they're awarded when the court decides that irreparable harm, like I was talking about, that if we go forward with the pause, we're not going to be able to come back and fix it after the courts go through their decisions. So the kind of the two rules around there is there indeed immediate harm that could happen? And we all know what those impacts are when the funding is not available and what that immediate harm is. And then also if the cases have a likelihood of success based on the merits. And so the courts have been ruling in that favor and saying that the Trump administration has to stop the funding freeze while then these cases are made in court and that sort of thing. The National Council on Foundations just recently also provided a really great FAQ page for a lot of the different things going on and the things that they're tracking in their particular case in general. and what's going on in the nonprofit community. And so I really encourage you to take a look at that as well, because it answers a lot of questions that may be coming up for your organizations in particular. So the freeze is supposed to be not going on because the courts have decided and provided that preliminary injunction. However, there is still a lot of things being held up with the freeze. And so there's still a lot of agencies that aren't getting paid, even though they should be. Um, there are a few NOFAs or notice of funding availabilities. I'm seeing a few being published after they've been reworked by the different agencies and then reissued. You can still apply for federal grants, and it's still, if you find a NOFA that you qualify for, you can still apply for that. So that part of the process is not stopped. It's just there's just more of a trickle of those NOFAs instead of the usual outpouring of those funding availability notices. You will also find that some have been zeroed out, and some of those opportunities that you maybe have always gone after or that you were thinking about going after, that they are kind of being just taken off the table completely, um, and could come back over time, but that they're kind of being zeroed out right now. Um, and then I'm also noticing that there's very few awards being made. So if you, applied for an app, submitted an application, that the awards aren't being distributed like they would have traditionally back in the beginning of January. Um, and then finally, what else is going on with the different agencies is there that their websites are being scrubbed for language, especially that language around DEI and being made to come into compliance with the administration's executive orders. So that's kind of what's going on right now. Not a very promising picture, but I hope that through this webinar, we'll find some things that we can be doing to getting our foot on some more stable ground, or our feet on some stable ground. Just to kind of add a little bit of, what's going on from foundations. When I did this like a month ago, I really thought there would be quite a huge outpouring of foundation support, kind of like the way that the foundations did with the pandemic. And they really, came out, supported our nonprofits, provided, very much more unrestricted dollars for us to keep our doors open and things like that. However, in general, has kind of been a little less robust of a response from philanthropic organizations who are also concerned about being targeted as well. And so one thing that the Center for Effective Philanthropy has a report out about kind of what's going on with philanthropy. And one of the things that they found out was that a lot of us in the nonprofit community, that our funders aren't necessarily connecting with us the way that we feel comfortable or we would like them to be. And either from the level of what are they planning on doing to adjust, um, or how if they are providing us with dollars, how we can then pivot to changing our, let's say, changing our budgets or distributing our grants in different ways and things like that. And so you may be finding that as well. So I mean, it's quite kind of a holding pattern of where we're at. So I haven't been very positive yet, but again, hopefully we'll get to a few little nuggets of information that can really help. So there are funders who have decided that they are going to increase their payout amounts So that's a good sign. They're coming out. A lot of the big funders are coming out and saying that they're going to, I think it's required that they give out 5% of their assets. They're going to 6 and 7 and 10% and those sorts of things. So that is a movement that's going on. And I think philanthropy is, was also very stymied as a whole group when this whole started. And I think we're going to start to see a little bit more loosening of that quiet communication and that the payout staying the same. And then you're also going to see some funders who have shifted to, or not shifted, but who have added additional focus to certain areas. So where climate change and energy types of things have really been put on the chopping block, that they're focusing and adding additional resources to those areas that have been particularly harmed. So again, I think the response is going it's again slower than we thought it would be, but I think it's going to start to speed up at least a little bit of finding out what these funders are doing in their own strategies. And one of the things that at GrantStation that we have is researchers who are constantly looking forward to what funders are going to fund in the future. And so we are consistently taking these lists and saying, okay, these funders are changing. They're going to add to what they're already doing, or they're going to take away from what they're already doing. It can go either way. But let's get these profiles updated in our database so that you all know as soon as we know, right, that where funders are and what they're doing, so that you can make those decisions and connect with the appropriate funders. So with all of that, I think, it's kind of this good news, bad news situation in some ways, that these things are changing from the way that we've normally done business. And that we really do have to diversify our funding sources. This isn't exactly new. That's always been the standard best practice, that you never have more than 50% of your funding is coming from government sources. The lower that percentage, the better. But we haven't necessarily engaged in it at that level of really doing it. So we kind of do know the roadmap, right? That we have to look at broader funding sources and bring more diversified funding into our organizations. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And also what kinds of things that could maybe add a strength given the changes that are going on. So we'll also talk about that and how we can incorporate some of the ways that funders might be looking at things, so that we're presenting to them the information that is going to make them the most excited to fund us. But before we kind of start with just, what kind of funders to go look at and what some of the differences are, I do just want to show you a little bit about our benchmarker tool. And this is a tool that GrantStation has. If you're a member or not a member, you can use our State of Grant Seeking survey and report tool. So just to give you an idea of what the tool is, every year we conduct a survey of nonprofit organizations and their grant seeking strategies. And if you would want to, I have here a link for you to take the 2024 survey where you're answering what you did in 2024. But we get the information, and our latest one was from 2023, and we surveyed 2,300 respondents and found out information on what their grant seeking strategies were. And then by using the benchmarker, what you can do is then compare your grant seeking strategies to like organizations to yourself to see, are we underperforming? Are we overperforming? What are other apples to our apples doing, right? So, because you can't imagine that an organization with a $50,000 budget working in animal rescue is going to be submitting the same number and types and areas of grants that, say, a healthcare organization with $1 million budget is going to be submitting. You don't want to compare yourselves against those two things. They're not a like to like. So, you can come into the tool, you can look at and you can plug in just what your annual budget range is, and then you can just plug in what your current mission focus is. And you can look at the results just by plugging in those two components and just clicking the boxes. So I'm using an example here of using the medium budget. So $100,000 to 999,000, and a human service organization. So let's kind of look. I'm just going to show you a couple things. You can then compare your organization to organizations like yourself on all of these different comparison points. So you can look at how much funding other organizations in your area of interest, what percentage of funding they get from grants, or how many grants they submit, or how many grants they've received, and what types of grants they got. And so this is a way for you to set realistic goals for yourself of things that other, again, like organizations are doing, um, and and kind of help you find that better balance maybe of looking at what's possible and what your organization might want to try out. So here you can just see, I'm just going to show you the results for two questions, but the first question being, how many grant requests did you submit in 2023? So you can see here, for human service organizations, they were submitting a lot, right? So the 29%, which was the largest percent, was submitting over 30. And that makes some logical sense to me, having worked with human service organizations, that's, you know, um, rings pretty true on the ground there. Then you can see over here for looking at your budget size. So in this regard, from $100,000 to 999, um, they're submitting, the most nonprofits are submitting an average of 3 to 5 grant proposals a year. So again, you can kind of see, where do you fit? Are you doing more than these organizations? Are you doing less? Do you want to create strategies to get more in line with what other organizations are doing? And what, could you kind of do to do that? Furthermore, here's just another question that's on the benchmarker. The largest source of your total grant funding in 2023. um, which it was a little bit of a surprise for me that private foundation grants were the largest in human services. I kind of would have thought it would have been the largest in government funding. But the federal government was just 21% and state 18%. So, kind of a surprise just to me. And then again, looking at the size of the organization, this, again, rings very true to the work on the ground that I've done, that for those organizations in that size range, that getting the most grants from the private foundations really rings true as well. So you can go into GrantStation, go into public resources. You can do that report. You can get all of the answers for your organization. You can take that back to your development committee or your board of directors or whoever's, working on this strategy as to how to help sustain your organizations. And it can be a really good starting point for you to try to decide which ways to continue exploring for additional funding sources. So, another thing that we have talked quite a bit about during this whole situation is how we have to make that pivot from our government sources more to our foundations and and those types of funders. And so, we always have our community foundations to look at. One of the things that I really recommend that you do is a lot of the donor advised funds that are out there, they're not listed separately as funds. And so usually if your community foundation has donor advised funds, you need to kind of talk to people at the foundation and see what's kind of out there in the donor advised funds. That's when groups of people or even single people come together and they pool their money together, and then they decide who gets the dollars. And usually there's not much of an application process, or it's a lot less than a traditional grant. So a lot of those, again, like I said, they're housed in your community foundations. So connect with those because they generally have a little less strings attached. And you have a little more flexibility in how you're allocating your budgets and that sort of thing. There's other ones that are under like large groups like Prudential, like big financial investment companies, and you can look at those as well. But your local community foundations, I would just call and talk with the staff there and see what they have, in addition to their own grants that they give out, right? What they have for those donor advice funds, and see if they can connect you with any of those funds. Then you have all of your family foundations, which are very, very diverse in the areas of interest that they fund and the amounts that they fund. And then you have your independent or private foundations to be reaching out to. Again, this is what a GrantStation membership is for, to find these foundations and find out what areas of interest they're supporting, how much they're giving in grants, how to contact them, how to apply, all those sorts of things. And one of the things that I really recommend and I know how challenging it is right now and how scary and how when we're out there talking with stakeholders or funders, we're talking about having some immediate needs. And I really encourage you yes, you do indeed have those needs. And yes, that is a real concern. But when you're out there, I think that you're going to be more effective if you're talking about your community's needs, your target population's needs, what is going to be the negative impact when your services aren't as available or robust or cut. Talk about those solutions that you provide and that impact that you have. And you can obviously talk about your own needs and what those dollars are that you need, or how you're going to allocate your budgets. But really getting out there and focusing on what difference you make in the world and how the lack of services is going to have a negative impact on, like I said, your community, your target population, whatever it is, and how you can then start to fill those gaps that exist right now. Okay, so just one little hint there to be doing that. Um, then I also wanted to talk a little bit about corporate giving. So you have your foundations on one side, public and private and independent foundations. But corporate giving comes in a lot of different ways, and this could also be, again, from kind of shorter term partnerships to longer term partnerships. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about the diversity of corporate giving, because it could be a strategy that you could start to develop within your own organization a little bit more. And again, looking at, is it short term, is it long term? How can we kind of what are some different models that we could then look at to get funding? And so it's all of these on this page. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I'm going to kind of talk through them on the next slide. So the most direct way is just when the corporations directly give to you. So this is coming from their corporate budget. They give you money, or they give you resources or services to support your cause, and that's coming from the corporation itself. So the Pepsi Corporation. The Another way that corporations give is through their corporate foundations. Okay, so a corporate foundation is run separately of the corporation. It has its own board of directors, but usually it kind of overlaps a little bit with whatever area of interest the corporation is about. So a corporation that does different work around, um, let's say, equipment for individuals with disabilities, then their corporate foundation would give monies to nonprofits that support individuals with disabilities, those kinds of things. So usually, that those corporate foundation giving is really tied into what the foundation has as their philanthropic goals, just like a private or a community foundation. Then we have all sorts of in-kind donations where they're giving you the products that they sell or giving you services of the dedication of their staff members. And so there's a lot of this going on where corporations are giving their accountant to help a nonprofit with their accounting systems, to give some legal counsel to a nonprofit that needs that legal support. And so these are also, not dollars that are actually, transacted, but if you can get those services or those supplies from a nonprofit or from a corporate giving model, then you don't have to raise those dollars yourself. So it's just a way to kind of get more support for your organization and not have to raise dollars, additional dollars to fund different areas. Then you have matching gifts. Again, the amount of money that is kind of left on the table is in the billions of dollars each year, because nonprofits aren't following up to see if their donors, employers, do match the gifts of their employees. And so it really, helps to put in that system of any of your donors that give to you, that you have some outreach mechanism to, double the donation, sometimes even more than that, triple the donation or whatever, by looking at those matching gifts from the companies. And like I said, it is $1 billion, billions of dollars are left on the table for that. Then kind of looking at volunteer grants, where companies do provide grants to nonprofits where their employees volunteer. So I also encourage you to really look at those board members, look at those volunteers that you have that come in and do different work for you, and see if you can work through their corporate structure to get different grants that the for-profit, the corporations and businesses are giving for their employees that do volunteer work in the community. And then, our corporate sponsorships, these are things that, you probably already know of when you have an event, and this usually comes from their marketing, and they're providing you with dollars to support your gala or your 5K walk or whatever it is that you're doing, and getting those dollars to support that area. And then these two will take more work, more partnership development. But when we're looking at longer term sustainability, which we need to be doing as nonprofits, these are, things that really can have a significant long term impact. One being like cause related marketing, where you're connecting on a greater level with a corporation. And so they're kind of getting the goodwill of your organization, and you're getting the benefit of revenue from the different causes that they support. So it could be that you get into cause related marketing, and potentially part of the revenue from the sale of each widget comes to your organization, right? And so you've balanced within that, you've built that relationship, and then, as those products are sold, you're getting kind of guaranteed revenue over time. And it's a win-win. I mean, you're bringing a lot of the goodwill of your organization to this company, right? And then they're providing you with some of the dollars to do the work that you do, and also just providing maybe even a greater reach for you as an organization to get those volunteers or get those donations from individuals and different things like that. So this does take time. You know, you really want to make sure that you are partnered with a very reputable organization, because they're not reputable, then your name is linked to them, right? So just maybe in looking at longer term partnerships to build that sustainability. And then community investments. Again, these are usually, again, longer term things, but it's when, say, like Starbucks does some of this, where they come into a community and they are providing job training and this and that to your community, to the members of your community, and you're working together for this social good to say, you know, let's work on the unemployment rate in this geographic area. And so they're not necessarily doing it because it's the best business decision, right? But they're doing it to give back to their communities and do it in a way that's very socially responsible. Okay. And so again, that would be a longer term goal. But working in these different areas does kind of provide some of that, you know, expansion of where you're getting dollars and being able to plan on dollars kind of consistently. Um, then beyond grants, as we're looking to diversify, I think, you know, really working with your individual donors, communicating what's going on to your donors, to your volunteers, to your board, keeping people aware of what's going on. And there again, there's, you know, there's that balance that we want to have, of that we have this challenging situation where we have needs, but yet I think you want to communicate again more on the side of how, you know, you're being impacted as an organization, and then what the results are to, again, your target population or your community. Communicating that with people so that they feel, instead of kind of defeated, that, oh my gosh, this organization's doing so poorly, I don't know that I want to invest in them, that you're really showing them kind of the avenue to keep your services alive, and how important your solutions are. And so that advocacy work as an organization, we really need to be out there doing that advocacy work and sharing what's going on with the wider public, because you see, you know, just a lot out there of things about nonprofits that aren't ethical and things like that. And you know, we know that that does happen once in a great while, but that's not by any realm of the possible, the norm. So we need to be out there communicating and telling that story. Anytime that you look at earned income strategies for your organization, or they're called fee for service models or social enterprises, those kinds of things where you're combining a for-profit component or a income generating component to the work that you do, that ties to your nonprofit. Again, those organizations that have that have always been more sustainable than organizations who don't have that. Because you can create a business plan and you can create those dollars, right, to support the work of your nonprofit. And so there are some rules about that, you know, how much earned income you can have. But this is something that organizations who have more earned income strategies tend to have higher rates of sustainability as an organization, and less, again, reliance on funders and government and politics and just kind of the way the wind blows sometimes. Um, and then kind of during this time frame, it could be, you know, again, that chance to go back, really look at any fundraising plan that you have, or a resource development plan that you maybe have drawn up in the past, taking some of that information from the state of grant seeking, looking at what's possible in other areas of funding, from other funders, and how you can readjust the piles of money that you have. And this could be a really good time to be doing that and to start kind of reacting to what a new normal might look like, and playing out those scenarios with again your development committees or your boards or whomever. Keeping up that engagement with your donors and your stakeholders is something that you want to keep on the front burner during this time. And then just looking at different ways to adapt your fundraising efforts. So if you have different things that you're doing, what has worked the best in the past? What can you continue to keep doing? So next, I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we can kind of make that pivot as we're either writing new proposals, communicating out there with different stakeholders. And the first part is really being able to demonstrate what is our financial impact of the work that we do, and starting to make those arguments about how we are actually helping the economy, um, as opposed to draining the economy, right? And so, really looking at, what happens when there is no action in these different areas that you're doing. What happens when work development activities start to go away? Well, then all of a sudden, you're going to have less people employed. Once you have less people employed, you're going to have a smaller tax base, right? So the work that you're doing is actually increasing the tax base. Just keep taking what you're doing to that next logical economic consideration, and communicating that with funders and donors and stakeholders. That we are a net positive impact on our communities, on the people we serve, and and learning how to kind of put that dollar sign with the work that we do. And so learning that, I think that that's going to be kind of in general, especially with any federal dollars or government dollars that you're going to still pursue in the future, there's going to have that how are you saving us money component. So really, again, telling that story. And, so let's say you work with youth and you try to get them to graduate from high school on time. Again, there's an economic impact of that. If students don't graduate from high school, there's a cost to your community. If you're working in a prisoner reentry program, right? Not having that program, there's a cost of what happens when people recidivate and go back to prison, right? So, like, keep taking the work you do and quantifying it and demonstrating your economic impact is really going to be important moving forward. Um, I also think if you can kind of combine some different activities where you're really looking at, let's say you're going to do some where you're trying to increase your donor base, right? By getting more donors to either, giving a bit larger of donations or reaching out and finding new donors of any size. And then reach out to funders asking for matching grants. Again, that's going to make your organization stand out in a very crowded field, because more of us are going to be going to these private foundations, right? And so if you can request like matching support, that if you give us this, $30,000, additional dollars that we need, we're going to match it with donations from our community, and show them how you're going to, number one, it shows how you have that community support. And then it's also going to show, kind of give you a little bit of a leg up in the competition in other nonprofits applying for funds as well. So I think kind of combining those two strategies could really make your proposals be even more engaging to, a more competitive field. And then the last one I want to talk about is just something that I've always talked about in teaching here at GrantStation and elsewhere. But really being able to always communicate the difference that you make in people's lives. And again, as nonprofits, that's kind of our superpower. I heard that called on another webinar. And I was like, that really is a superpower that we have. We have access to people that are experiencing um, the lack of a service, or people on the ground that are directly affected by these cuts, and being able to tell their stories and being able to tell the difference that you make in their lives is really critical. And those organizations that can rally at this time and tell that part of their story are the organizations that are going to be more competitive moving forward. Um, and so if we do a logic models webinar, which teaches you how to do that, and how to kind of measure the outcomes that you have on your target populations. And if you need some work in that, it is a recorded webinar that you can get on our website as well. So I want to just kind of end again with the mental health kind of components. Again, I don't think this can really be underestimated, because this is going to be a while as we work through this, as we see what's going on and what's ping-ponging back and forth, and changes. And, just most of us really feel whiplashed right now. And so again, there's a great article that you can link to here on mental health during this political time of really, being intentional about our news consumption. I had the opportunity to not have any news this last weekend. I found it actually delightful. I have to be engaged, but sometimes I just have to walk away, and we all do, right? So that then we can come back energized and, kind of refilled up to continue fighting the fight. Um, Setting your own boundaries, again, very important. Walking away if you need to. Um, Looking at that self-care for yourself, and the physical and mental health, and doing your hobbies and those sorts of things, and then just strengthening your own support systems. So I love that everybody's really giving this a lot of love, because I think that it is a critical point. I think the strategy is to kind of wear us down. The strategy is to have a lot of ping pong balls floating around us at all times, so we can't kind of focus in and really get a strategy together. So there's the mental health component, and then what can we do to keep our own organization sustainable, which hopefully you learned about some things to do today, and how to really, pivot and make your organization stand out. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Alice. So we do have a few questions already. If you do have a question, jump over to the Q&A section and enter them there. As you can see, there's a lot of comments in the chat, so those can kind of get lost over there. One question from Heidi said, how do we still apply for federal grants when the sites have been removed or taken down?
Yeah. So if they did pull, an RFP or a NOFA, or they didn't release it, that sort of thing, then you can't apply for it. But what I'm saying is that if there is one that, has not been pulled or has been released since the first freeze, and they, scrubbed the words and they changed their focus and made it in a line with the executive orders, then you can still apply if it comes out then. But if they scrubbed it or pulled it out or didn't release it, then we're still in that holding pattern of figuring out what's going to happen with this particular funding source. And so, if you can get in touch with any of the federal agencies and their program officers, that's the ideal thing to do. Again, those positions are being cut as well, so that can be challenging. So kind of realize to give it your best attempt and try to do that. And then if that doesn't work, then try to talk to other people who maybe have done grant review in that area, or other previous fundees, or grantees of that funder, and that sort of thing, and try to kind of go in the back door and see if you can find out what's going on.
Great. Then another question, do you think that with all the changes, smaller nonprofits are going to have less opportunities to get funding? For example, my nonprofit is quite new and small and new to applying for grants in general. Will foundations focus more on larger organizations?
So that's a great question, China, and I don't know that I have an exact answer for that. I think that because organizations who have historically had federal funding are usually a little bit larger, just as a general, idea and a little bit more established. They're going to be competing more for those private dollars, which is going to make um, the funding landscape in working with foundations or corporations and all that kind of stuff more challenging, just more competitive. But I don't think that it's necessarily a reason to stop or to not try to do those things of what is your economic impact, what difference do you make in the community. Again, if you can still communicate that, what your solutions are, what inactivity, what the cost of inactivity is, you'll still be able to apply for grants, and those things will increase your competitiveness. So don't like just stop because it's going to be more competitive. If you can, do that
Hmm.
work, find those grantors and keep at it.
Great. Then Audrey says, what are the income limits for earned income for a nonprofit for revenue generating income?
So I don't have the exact answer to that. I know that there are things that you do have to report if you are generating income, and there's a form that nonprofits have to fill out, and I can't remember the threshold off the top of my head, but it's I want to say $1,000, but that could be wrong. If you have more than $1,000 of earned income, then you have to report it on a separate form, that sort of thing. But you can look that up because there's a specific form, federal form that you fill out as a nonprofit. But then there's also rules around revenue generation and how tied it is to the mission of your organization. And so the tighter the connection, the less it's considered earned income than if you were just starting a for profit to help support a nonprofit, right? So sometimes if there's mission overlap, I worked at a nonprofit and we did a lot of technology as our nonprofit kind of component. So when we sold technology, it was so tied to our mission. We didn't have to report that as earned income revenue, like as if we were selling houses, right? I mean, like
Mhm.
that's like two different. So always check. We have some great presenters that have done a lot around social enterprise, um, fee for service, earned income strategies, all those kinds of words. So kind of looking up what might be possible for you there.
Great. Then Angela says, one of our challenges is not having large corporations in our area. How do you attract attention to corps and raise interest?
Yeah, that's Angela. I'm in a really rural community as well, and so that's a problem that we have here in West Virginia. And so some of the things that that you might want to start to just look at again, take your entire stakeholder list of again board, um, partners, volunteers, the people that you serve, find out what their business connections are, find out do that, where do they work? Where do they buy things? Look at vendor corporations who don't necessarily have to be in your general area that you buy from them and they're your vendors. Look for organizations that again just share the mission that you have, even if they're not in your community, right? Because you could do some of that cause related marketing um, because you share a cause, right? So those are some of the things to kind of do. But it is, I totally understand it's way more challenging in some of the rural areas that don't have a lot of businesses.
Makes sense. Then Karen asks, are there groups lobbying on behalf of nonprofits?
So yes, there are. I would really connect with the National Nonprofits of the National Council on Nonprofits. And when you get the slides, there's a link to them. They're probably the biggest one. Again, they're the plaintiffs in one of the big funding freeze cases. So they're keeping things really updated, and they're out there on behalf of the nonprofit community. They provide resources to help us, like, to go out to talk to our constituents about, like, here's resources about talking about this and all that sorts of things. So definitely connect with them.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Vicky says,
Okay.
how do we get invitations to apply? So many are invite only.
Yeah. So that is, again, always a challenge. One of the things to plug us here at GrantStation is, one of the things about our database is that we put in and kind of verify funders who are actively seeking applications. So that is kind of a bonus to using our databases, is that if you're getting funders and you're, searching for funders, these are all active funders and not those funders who are invite only. The invite only is a longer term process. I mean, you're going to have to reach out to them. You're going to have to start to develop that relationship. It's going to be different with every funder. Not that it's impossible to do, but it's a longer term strategy for developing that partnership. But with a GrantStation membership, the ones that you find are going to be hot live funders for you to go after.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com.